All right, good morning, Fort Wayne. How's everyone feeling after that meditation? Good? Ready to talk about justice? Closer? Is this good? Can everyone hear me? Okay, good. All right, so justice is a really big word for Friday morning. So hopefully you are all caffeinated enough, grounded enough. Ooh, there it is. So thank you, Chelsea, for leading us in meditation to help us get grounded and be present in this moment. And thank you to the Creative Morning team and Olivia for continuously providing us opportunities to be inspired and be motivated. And thank you to the Botanical Conservatory, because what a beautiful place that we can all be together today to have a cup of coffee and a conversation. And so justice is a really big idea. And it can be really overwhelming if we leave it just as that. And we all have the creative capacity to influence the world around us. So today I'm hoping that I can share my thoughts and some of my experiences so we can make this really big, overwhelming idea. We can make it something that we can together shrink down into something that fits into each one of our seats, that's tangible, that we can walk away with today. Because when we have the creative capacity to influence the world around us, we have the creative capacity to work towards justice. And when we're talking about justice, we're talking about the fairness and equity, the respect and upholding every individual. And we can spend the whole morning, the whole day, talking about what's unfair and about what's unjust. And that's what's really overwhelming. That's what makes the idea of justice overwhelming. It's the magnitude of the injustice that we're seeing in the world today. And I want to share a quote by James Baldwin. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced. And so why I want to share that quote today, because it's basically a summation of the next 20 to 25 minutes. So if you really just came for the coffee and you gave me your best 2 minutes, and this is all you can remember this. Because James Baldwin was brilliant. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced. And why is that important? It was important when he first said it. It was important every second since. And it's important here today, August 9th, Fort Wayne, Indiana. We're inundated with information. Not only are we seeing the injustice that's right in front of us, that's happening in our city, we're seeing what's happening in Sudan, Venezuela, the injustice that's happening at our southern border, in Mississippi, in El Paso, in Dayton. And we're receiving all this information. As soon as a mass shooting starts, we get that information. We get all the details about that, and we hear every single story of an individual that's affected by atrocities that are throughout the world today. And that's a lot. That's a lot for all of us as individuals, as humans, to take on. And we have to have some grace with ourselves to recognize that that's a lot of information. But that's what makes it overwhelming. We get all this information, we become overwhelmed, and justice becomes this concept that seems like it's too far out of reach. Maybe it seems like it's someone else's responsibility. Or maybe it's easy for us to ignore. And there's a danger if we stay in that space. Because then the abnormal becomes the perceived norm. Then as a society, our perceived norm is injustice. A while ago, I had the ability to go to Nairobi. I was volunteering through Creative Women of the World, and while I was there, we were with some friends outside, and we were asked to come inside to watch the news. Something was happening. And there was a shooting at one of the malls in Nairobi. And as an American, my reaction to that was perceived as insensitive, because I knew at the same time, back at home, there were 3 shootings that happened here already that week. I was numb. And in a city of almost 7 million people, that wasn't the norm. That wasn't what was being experienced on a regular basis. When I personally lost somebody to gun violence, I was devastated. And I was trying to navigate what this meant for me, what this meant for the world around me. And I was at the downtown Y 2 days after I heard about the news. And I was talking to Miss Gwen at the front desk. And somebody comes to scan their card because they're coming to work out as well. In a very casual manner, she goes, "Did you hear that we lost him last night? It was another drive-by." She scans our card and walks in. And for me, in that moment, I realized that not only are we desensitized as a society, we're desensitized as communities and as individuals. And how do we use our creative capacity when working through this, when presented with this overwhelming feeling that there's so much injustice? In order to move from injustice to justice, we have to think of a couple of things, and that is promoting awareness and having accountability for ourselves and each other. So back in 2013, I had the honor to be a part of a global movement that used creativity in the form of dance to promote awareness and to generate connection. So this movement was started by Eve Ensler back in 2012, and it was brought here to Fort Wayne in 2013 by Lori Rose. And this movement called for 1 billion people to rise up on Valentine's Day and to celebrate women, celebrate healthy relationships, healthy sexuality, spirit, mind, mental, emotional, physical well-being. And why we are calling for 1 billion people to rise up was because 1 in 3 women are affected by violence. 1 in 3 women will be physically or sexually abused in her lifetime, which equates to around 1 billion people. And so through dance, through creative movement, we are calling everybody to rise up, to take a stand, and to show up, to create awareness and to create connection. And so what did this look like? We had a team of amazing individuals. One of them's here today, Steve, that put this together, was coordinating it, and was doing the logistics and making sure this event went off on February 5th or 14th. And since it was a call to dance, we needed dancers. And it just so happened that Lori was a Zumba instructor, so getting buy-in for the dance wasn't that hard. And so we would have practices. We would come together, we would learn this dance that's being taught on an international level. And at the end of these practices, we would come together. At the end of our meetings, when we're trying to coordinate the event, we would come together and we would talk about why are we a part of this movement. And in the beginning, it was a lot of, I like dancing, it's a good cause, I want to show up for my community. And then the more of the dance that we learned, the more we felt support from each other. Those statements turned to, well, I know somebody. This was my friend, this was my sister. And the closer we got to the 14th, the more we felt supported, the tighter we got as a community. The statements turned more to I statements. I'm 1 in 3. This is my story. And this is something that's so beautiful that was not the point of why we were coming together, but it was the most important piece, that we created this community of support where women could come together and show up and tell their story and know that the community was there for them. And so while we found this to be such a good success, there was hardships in this as well. When we asked people for support, whether it was financial or to have groups show up, we had some people that didn't want to support it. Some people that said, this language is a little too intense. This isn't really something I want to talk about. We had schools that wouldn't let their dance teams be a part of it. And that was frustrating. To be honest, it pissed me off, because how would you not want to support this? But I realized that a lot of these people were uncomfortable. Because when we're talking about violence against women, when we're talking about rising up and celebrating women, in this whole concept, it makes you think about 1 in 3. And so, despite the hardships, despite going through all of this and coming together and learning this dance, on February 14th, 2013, in the middle of winter in Fort Wayne, outside at Parkview Field, over 400 people came together. They came together to show up for their community. They came together to celebrate women. This became one of the largest mass calls to action for awareness against violence, or for violence against women. Awareness for violence against women. It's hard to say. Over 200 countries participated in this global movement. They used creativity and dance as a means to facilitate a conversation, as a means to take a step in shifting the perceived norm. And Fort Wayne showed up. And Fort Wayne continued to show up. And still does. We showed up today. And as we know, on February 15th, violence against women did not end. And it's something that we have to continuously work towards. And a piece of that, not the sole responsibility, but a piece is how our government can influence a shift in the norm. And the government's done this by enacting the Violence Against Women's Act, 1994, and since has been able to provide funding to local communities like Fort Wayne, like our local YWCA and other communities, so that survivors can have support, so that there can be education in schools about healthy relationships, so that there can be training for law enforcement, for social service providers, so we can shift our community's norm. This year, the Violence Against Women's Act has not been reauthorized, and it's up for a vote in the Senate. And that's a way that we can make ourselves aware of what's going on. We can make our senators aware of what's going on and why this is important to our community. And so, like I said, government doesn't have the sole role in shifting communities, as we know. Movements like 1 Billion Rising, like Me Too, and like the Women's March, all have a role in providing that support in that community, because when we're thinking about justice, it can be overwhelming. And it can put it in this bubble that's just too far out of reach, somebody else's responsibility, or easy to ignore. And we need to recognize that if we have the capability of ignoring injustice, we have a great privilege. Because there's so many people in this world, in this space today, where we cannot ignore injustice. And this is why we have to face it. And it's hard, and it's overwhelming, but it's something that we can continuously work towards. Have to move to my next page now. Around the same time that I was getting involved with 1 Billion Rising, I started my journey at Amani Family Services. And Amani Family Services is a local immigrant-founded, immigrant-led nonprofit partnering with immigrant and refugee families and the community. And through my work at Amani, I was able to be connected to the Multicultural Council, where I sit as a steering committee member. And I had the opportunity to co-found and currently co-facilitate the anti-trafficking network of Northeast Indiana. And what the 3 of these initiatives have in common is that they are intentional about upholding the unique identity, experiences, values, and beliefs of the individuals directly and indirectly benefiting from their services. What that means and how they achieve this is that not only are the individuals benefiting from the mission, whether it's immigrant and refugees or the multicultural community or survivors of trafficking, they're not only informing these initiatives, they're leading these initiatives. So what does that mean for me? I'm not an immigrant or a refugee. I'm white. I'm not a survivor of trafficking. For me, this means I have to hold myself accountable. I have to do the work. I have to educate myself. I cannot expect nor can I demand anyone do this for me. I need to be self-aware. Am I navigating situations through a self-centered perspective or a person-centered perspective? Am I taking up space that's not meant for me? Am I using my voice to stifle or speak for someone, or am I using my voice to create a platform that amplifies others? When do I stand up? When, this is most important, when do I step back? Silence is so important. And when silence is paired with genuine curiosity and openness, something beautiful can be created. And this is important when we're working towards justice. When we're working towards justice and fighting an injustice that we may not have a personal experience with, we need to be conscious in how we're navigating this and how we're showing up. At my time at Amani, I had the privilege to oversee our prevention department. And what this meant was when somebody's coming to Amani for that service, they don't have any activity within the court system or an open Department of Child Service case. They just have a goal, they want some support, and they want someone to show up. And I think we can all relate to that because we have all had a goal at some point and all needed some support with that. And the cool thing about Amani, the really unique and great thing about Amani, is that when somebody shows up, most often they share the same language. And so my role in that was that I needed to show up and support my staff. And what this looks like is we would have meetings and we would talk about the successes and the challenges that the families and individuals that we're working with may be facing, and how can Amani best help those individuals. So I'd give my 2 cents, I'd give my advice on how I would navigate the situation. But what was important from those meetings wasn't what I was saying. What was important from those meetings was the collaboration in our dialogue. The mutual expectation that we would hold each other accountable. So if I said something, if I gave advice that maybe wasn't culturally relevant to a specific family that we're working with in that moment, then in that specific moment, my staff's voice was more important than mine. And when we're all at the table, we're all collaborating and contributing to a solution, we're creating something that is more holistic and effective than anything I could ever attempt to do on my own. And when we start to figure out as creatives our role and how we can show up at the table, how we can contribute to the solution, we can take this idea of justice and we can keep it in that bubble, and we can perpetuate injustice, and we can be okay with whatever our perceived norm is now. Or we can use our creative capacity to have the idea of justice right here, right in front of us. It's our responsibility, and it's impossible to ignore. And as creatives, we play a very vital role in working towards justice. And I want to share a quote by a creative, by Alan Pelez Lopez, an Afro-Indigenous poet, collage, installation, and adornment artist from Mexico. And he uses the word artist, but for the sake of this morning, I think it's appropriate to interchange the word creative. When you leave creatives out of a movement, you are leaving out any chance of actually changing people's minds, politics, and ideas. You need creatives who can imagine other ways of living. Creatives who remind all of us that even at our lowest peak, we are still embodied subjects with the possibility of laughter, indulgence, sexy roleplay, tears, orgasms, etc. You need creatives who write down the stories we are too afraid to speak out loud. And just as Creative Mornings reminds us that we all have the capacity to be creative, I'm here to remind you all that in your capacity to be creative, we all have a role in promoting justice. Thank you. I think for me, something that helps inspire me is things like Creative Morning and coming together and having community. That's something that's really, really important. And when I talk about we have to face injustice and how overwhelming that can be, it's really important to have a community that can be supportive in that. It's also important to see what other creatives are doing and what other creatives that may not look like what mainstream looks like, and seeing what that creative capacity can be, seeing what else is out there, seeing what's not our normal intake of media or art, finding new ways to get involved in the community, or finding ways that I can make myself a little bit uncomfortable and shift my norm a little bit as well. I think all of those things kind of help perpetuate that inspiration and keep that momentum going. That's a really great question. And I think that goes back to having the genuine curiosity and openness and ability to be okay in saying I messed up, and that we can't expect anyone to teach us how we should be having these conversations. We can't expect anyone to be sharing their experiences if they don't want to be sharing their experiences, but having that openness. And sometimes that can be really uncomfortable to say, yep, I should not have said that, or I messed up, or help me through this. And asking permission to have somebody help you navigate that, and not just assuming that because someone's different than you, or because they have a different experience than you, they look different, they speak a different language, not expecting that they're going to be in a space that they are going to help you navigate that. And so that's kind of where it comes back to our personal accountability and anything that we can do to educate ourselves or be more aware. But having that openness and genuine curiosity is really important in that. from personal experience, I know that you cannot get involved in everything. I've learned that the hard way. I think if something's affecting us personally, that's where a passion could lie in what we're getting involved with. And if, again, we have the privilege to not have anything affect us personally, then whatever pisses you off the most. Because that's where you're going to have passion. That's where you're going to have the energy to contribute. You can take that anger, you can take that frustration, you can put it towards something good in your creativity. And that doesn't mean that we don't have to show up to other things or to face other things, but we cannot, again, from personal experience, I know, we cannot give 100% to every single justice that we're fighting towards. So that is self-care number one, is that we have boundaries. And having time to spend on yourself and having time to do things that are aside from promoting justice, and to taking time to slow down and to having your people, to having support. Those are all incredibly important in taking care of ourselves when we are going through this. I think first going back to figuring out like where we are passionate about that, but also being more aware and having conversations around these things, because that is, I mean, that's the hardest part, right? Because it makes us uncomfortable. And I think even, you know, if we're talking about things like trafficking, which has kind of been like a hot topic over the past couple of years, you know, that's like a big sensationalized thing that we see in the media. But there's also the injustices, and not saying that it just like happened in the last 2 years, but we're having more conversations around it. There's also the injustices in regards to race, in regards to sexuality or sexual orientation, that are kind of ongoing as well, that we have conversations, but that's where I see things that aren't as in our face as maybe trafficking. Like, we can all stand here and say like, trafficking's bad, that's not okay, but it's harder to have, I think, those conversations on injustices that have really been a part of this abnormal perceived norm. And that's where we have to do a lot of the work too. And so there's a lot of local organizations like Amani or the Center for Nonviolence, the YWCA, that are doing a lot of really good work in this. And I guess if you want specific organizations, I can let you know those too, and more of those. But yeah, I think there's a education and just having those hard conversations. When we hear something being said, or when we hear something that maybe just doesn't sound right, or maybe that we don't know, like something's being said, like trafficking, and we don't really know what that is, that we're doing some education to figure out what that is, or we're seeing how we can stand up in that moment.